So when I was a boy, I was absolutely fascinated by history, and I was a voracious reader of all kinds of historical novels and studies and all of that. And I was also really fascinated by my home state of Montana and the history of Montana. And so as I grew older, I became interested in what you might call an alternate history of Montana, or a history that was unknown, that was real, but but nobody knew about it. I also began to use history as play in my poems. And so I'd like to start with a poem from my first book, which dates way back to 1981. The book's A Radiant Map of the World, and it's called Emma Goldman in Montana. Now, Emma Goldman was a Russian anarchist who was driven out of Russia after the revolution and came to America and became a great agitator for kind of progressive causes. And so this is taken from a news clipping I found in one of the Montana papers. And here we go, Emma Goldman in Montana. On the chill June wind, the voice of a newsboy, high priestess of anarchy, stranded in Cowtown, Drummond, Montana, 1908. Bareheaded and portly, Emma stood on the train platform and scowled. She had no text for natural disasters, 9 inches of snow, a downpour of rain greasing the iron rails. Chicago would have to wait. Only the day before, she had shouted from the pulpit of Butte's Unitarian Church, "Women, unbind yourselves. Men, demand a living wage." And now in the stuffy car, the Tacoma baseball team threw fastballs past her graying head. 600 passengers heated the narrow hallways, 600 bodies eating, drinking, singing, throwing baseballs white as the still gathering snow. Emma pulled the collar of her gray coat tight around her portly neck, threw open the door and ran down the iron steps. Walking icy streets, she observed the farmers stranded with their stock and the Indians encamped freezing by the river. The farmers were, quote, unkind, greedy, and suspicious of the stranger, and the Indians, quote, infected with venereal disease, their lungs eaten by the white plague. Only the day before, when Emma's voice had echoed profane and loud in the nave of a Protestant church, the miners of Butte stared at their boots, fearful for their mud-spattered jobs, their crusts and water packed in a perfect lunch, and their good Catholic wives wept and prayed, afraid of the company goons and their own hard men, dangerous with drink and sperm. Warm wind opened the earth, trains rattled and clanged. Emma caught a fastball in her strong right hand, felt the taut energy of the cords and sinews, knuckled it back to Tacoma. She wrote in her journal, "The train is speeding towards Chicago. My heart outwings it."
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Poets in Montana. And you have just heard the wonderful work of Rick Newby. Rick is, well, as he indicates from the date on that poem, been around for a long time in Montana, writing poetry. That first book, Rick, it was a winner of the Montana Book Award back in '81. Is that right?
Yeah, the first book award. Yeah.
Yeah, and you followed that up with a chapbook. Is that right? That or the man in the
oh yes, the man in the green load and overcoat was a collaborative work with a visual artist and so an artist book.
You've done a lot of that collaboration with visual artists, haven't you?
I collaborate with all kinds of artists. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not just
sure.
Yeah.
So what? And I saw that title, and I thought, well, was that some kind of a play on Bly, on Robert Bly?
Perhaps, but it
long
was
time
just.
ago.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad to have you with me today, Rick. We said earlier when we were kind of chatting before this, I really have enjoyed taking this journey back into your work, because your work is so connected with the landscape and the history of Montana, as you sort of alluded to in that intro before the Emma Goldman poem. And then I was going to ask you about the Emma Goldman poem. It was you said it was in reference to a newspaper clipping. Was any of that language found language from the clipping itself, or did?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In particular, the pieces where I said quote, those were direct from that article.
Right.
So
right.
It was pretty rich language, not necessarily politically correct, but definitely rich language.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, and I love to work with these kinds of documents. So
yeah, it creates such a great portrait, and then you go beyond that. But the portrait of Emma Goldman, she's a presence in that poem.
Yeah,
she was in life.
Yeah, she sure was. Yeah.
So, do you? I know you mentioned you had another poem that you kind of wanted to share early on in terms of the historical significance in your work. Do you want to do that now, or?
Sure. This is a poem from another collaboration with a visual artist. The artist was Doug Turman, who's a painter and printmaker here in Helena. And he and I did a series of 12 texts and 12 etchings. So he obviously did the etchings. And so this was a very much more playful series in which we tried to imagine improbable folks coming to Montana. And it's called Sobering Moments in Montana History, Actual Events, Genuine Characters. And and so here's that poem. And by the way, this particular poem is a prose poem, which, as we discussed earlier, Mark, I do a lot of. So
yeah.
And many of the poems in this series are prose poems. So this is called Lewis and Clark Encounter the Hordes of Genghis Khan on Maria's River, north central Montana, circa 1805. And it has an epigram from The Secret History of the Mongols, the origin of Genghis Khan. There came into the world a blue-gray wolf whose destiny was heaven's will. His wife was a fallow deer. They traveled together across the inland sea. From the journals of Genghis Khan. Can this be a dream? We are lost, riding steady day by day through a vast landscape populated by strange beasts and stranger men. We must travel quick as the wind, and we have left our stalwart wives and children at home with the yurts. Tall men on tall horses, we ride graceful across this prairie of endless grasses. I am lonely. I imagine my wife, a lovely fallow deer, ill and dying, and my sons threatened by knives and treachery. And then this fine midsummer's day, my loneliness departs. We chance upon, it seems a miracle, a little band of the native peoples, their skin pale, their beards tangled thick as the brush at this river's edge. Barbarians, savages, less than half civilized, still these men dwell in a rich world. They show us a warm hospitality, their faces oddly free from all curiosity and fear. We eat steaks cut from a monstrous white bear and entrails ripped from the shaggy cattle that crowd this land from horizon to horizon. These strangers rise to dance their feet marking time to haunting music. One man plays an instrument we do not know, stroking its strings with a bow strung with the hairs of fleet horses. How tenderly he plays, how fierce and joyful, like a looter set free in a city recently abandoned. When they urge us to join in their merriment, I, a blue-gray wolf, stand aloof, puzzled, seduced, entranced by their light-hearted leaping and the soothing strains of an undeniable lullaby. Caught in a spell, I drift towards sleep. What world is this? Tonight I lie alone in my conqueror's tent, trapped by dreams, made restless by swarming insects, eager to suck my blood. A dog howls close by, half crazed. Perhaps when I wake, I will find myself encamped on the blessed steps of my homeland, holding in my warrior's arms the wife, that lovely fallow deer I love above all things.
All right. The Journals of Lewis and Clark. Yeah, voices from the past. In that section of that, and that was from Old Friends Walking in the Mountains, right?
That's correct. That's right.
Yeah. I got a kick out of when I was reading through those poems. I got a kick out of the last two in that section, which were Charlie Russell related poems, and quite different from one another. And yes. I'd be interested in sharing, reading those. They're not that long, but
would you like me to read?
I would. I one or the other. Either way, twins separated. The Picasso poem or the Charlie's Cheesecake poem is wonderful too. I love that poem.
Okay.
And of course, if a person could, you should, kind of try to show Doug Terman's images too. There you go.
Right. So this is the etching that went with the Charlie's Cheesecake poem.
Exactly.
And, one of the things that's always fascinated me about Charlie Russell is that even though he didn't necessarily broadcast it, he actually spent some time in Europe studying European painting, just as a tourist sort of, but it can't not have had some impact on his work.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Of course, just to be clear, he really loathed the modernists. And there's some great quotes of him attending a futurist exhibition in London, and he just really makes fun of those works. But here I have him kind of edging toward modernism. So this is Charlie's Cheesecake, or how in his last days, Charles M. Russell painted a modernistic nude study, which he intended to submit to the annual salon of the Society of Independent Artists of Paris, France, but which sadly was lost immediately following his demise, circa 1926. There are many ways to die, to end: despair, savage rage, quiet, peaceful lingering. But my gentle mountain friends, I have chosen a last tender look at love of the physical body, not my own, but other. This woman's body enshrined in flowers and silver leaves, sleeping beauty rousing my sleeping loins, the breast, the nipple, the pubis, the belly, natural foci of desire, someone writes. And I ask, but what is natural? This articulation of line and form and color sensuously applied, this appropriation, hesitant gesture of wanting, of a body made sacred by my hesitant love. Soon these long years will end, but my dream of perfect repose will linger, will hang in my studio, hewn from lodgepole and larch, still vibrant, still living, and those who follow me will know the body was his true subject, the body born of longing and a sacred pleasure held him dreaming at the end.
I love that. I love that simply because you know, we know so much about Charlie in Montana, and he is just such of an iconic figure that we associate everything we think we know about Charlie Russell through his words and his art. But this little poem imagines something that we don't know about Charlie, the secret, and it's buried. It was destroyed. It's like Nancy didn't want that to see the light of day, right?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's just classic. I love that poem. Yeah.
So Mark, you had mentioned that you might want me to read a couple of my Montana landscape poems.
Exactly.
And the Montana landscape poems came out of an impulse to, you know, because I actually write a lot about visual artists, and I'm close to a lot of visual artists in Montana. And so some of them work close to a form of abstraction. And so I wanted to kind of get a little closer to that. It's, you know, it's not always easy to do that in language, but I was inspired in part by what they call the language poets, but my work probably is a little more grounded than theirs and less out there.
Yeah.
Although fairly out there. So I started doing these Montana landscapes, which I imagine as close to visual work as I can do. And so I'll read a couple that you mentioned you'd like to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's several of them in the second book, Old Friends Walking in the Mountains. This one's called Montana Landscape Stalked by Hungry Wolves. He stops eating. I have stopped eating. Bone china shines like unblemished glass. The cup rang against concrete and shattered. A taste for extracts of lemon and cherry, a taste for sin. Nothing whetted his appetite, neither blood nor phlegm. She loved him, his speech patterns. He spat out contempt for all sentient beings, his hand clutched between overweight thighs. Continence and incontinence, two coins of indifferent metal. The gallery burned to the ground. All art bleeds, he said, his toupee tousled, his green eyes red-rimmed. So much suffering. Organ box, orange crate, orchestral skeet, shotgun affair, objects of desire, an exquisite meal, candlelight and wine, a table embroidered with birds of paradise, violins or perfect silence, the perfect waiters, and thou, my love. Refusal becomes you, she said. The ink stain marred her profile. I am compulsive but passionless. Dance a tango in the moonlight. Anorexic romance. Where have the children wandered? Wondered the beautiful governess, her hands busy in the chauffeur's pants. Sorry, a little racy there. And again, these are not narrative poems in any sense. I mean, they're moving everywhere, and that was kind of my thought, was to kind of break loose from a more narrative structure, even though I have many narrative poems. So, and again, this one could see this as kind of almost pure play.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So actually, Mark, I'd like to read a different one, not this interior view one, but rather the one that appears in my third book, The Suburb of Long-Suffering, that's a love poem for my wife, Liz Gans. And so there was something that sparked this poem, and that was one day, my friend Dale Livesey, who's a painter, a landscape painter primarily, and my wife Liz both wanted to have me sit and paint. They wanted to paint my portrait. So I responded with this poem. And so this is Montana Landscape as Portrait for Liz. Slim gal, you raid the heavens, seek new shades, variations of the as yet unseen. I sit in the ugly chair. You race into cities, chewing great chunks of a bread free of salt. My friend, you stand at the edge of vision, glaring at the intractable, or stare gravely into distances, your gaze never wavering, the tug of landscape evident in the thin application of your strokes, precisely placed but passionate. I sit comfortable as an old jacket in the ugly chair, my breath steaming. In the chill studio, no one sees the near, only the far. I am close by. You leap across a gully, your legs slender and bare. I sit in the hideous chair, the wall acid yellow in your rendition. There is no doubting your emotion. You walk to the subject, place the finger under chin, lift just a hint and grin. On the steep stairway, two Bengali men consult their guidebook. Another walker halts her climb, guidebook held aloft, unconsulted. Our guidebooks are identical, she confides, delighted by this uncalled for emblem of kinship. You trace the map, find a Tuscan mountain touched by fog. You slept here happy amidst olive groves, isolate chestnut trees, and the sheep jog gently nudged us home out of the fold, the tumble-down barn, down the winding dirt track to Firenze and Roma. I dream in the awful chair. You paint the first moment of recognition. Saffron grows in the garden, precious strands drifting on the breeze.
Nice, nice. That's and you know that one definitely does have more of a thread of narrative, I think.
It does.
Than the landscapes from the Walking in the Mountains book.
That's right. Yeah, much more. Yeah.
And of course, and you bring in the actual landscape painter to do their routine too. It's nice, but it also moves out in that wonderfully imaginative way. But I mean, just the knowledge, the little bit of a setup in your discussion prior to us hearing it gave us that the idea of you, the speaker, being painted by a painter, and then this very close, intimate sort of person that's a relationship to you in the poem that then it all works out of. Yeah, I like, that's a nice poem. The other poems too, and the other landscape poems, as I think I mentioned to you when we were talking before we started this recording, I was struck by, you mentioned that they were exercises in play, and I think that's, yeah, totally. I mean, what else? Poets do a lot of that, or we oftentimes do a lot of that. But there are also a lot of exercise in music in those landscape poems. I felt like they were really maybe music and play both, or they were at play with each other. Maybe oftentimes we employ music more when we're in a playful mood with the poem. I don't know. I thought about.
I think that's probably right. Yeah, because you're in a certain way you're freer, just to.
Yeah, you're letting the right side of your brain kind of take over, and not being so logical and constructive as we are in our, left side thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, those are well, one of the things I think that struck me about them too, those landscape poems in Walking in the Mountains, was that the pronouns. I mean, you mentioned well, it was like I never had a sense. You had I's and you's and he's and she's and all this stuff going on, and sometimes this sort of just this omniscient sort of declaration of something. So it was this movement all over the place that kept us kind of confused, but we felt we were in a narrative, and it never lost me in a way that, you know, sometimes with the language poets, I say not the language poets, but I mean sometimes in those poems that are less descriptive and more ephemeral, or just depending on the play of language, I don't really feel like I get lost sometimes, and I have to go back and try. I did not have that problem with those landscape poems in this book. I was just like along for the ride, and I just really enjoyed it. And one more thing I want to say before I let you hit us with about 18 more poems is that one of the things that struck me in reading your work again was, you know, what happened to me was like I flashed on, because we are such of a television, this baby boom generation, I flashed on these old Westerns like The Virginian, or I mean, this kind of it was sort of an elevated, it was almost an Eastern language kind of that came into this environment of this Western sort of thing, and all the stuff that hangs in this Western atmosphere. But it was a very sort of an educated and almost elevated language tone within the poems, and I thought that was incredibly interesting. You know, I mean, it was just it happened to me. I don't know if it happens to other people like that, but
no, I love that. I love that, Mark, because that's exactly right. I mean, it was a highly, for the most part, I mean, there were certainly people who were not literate, but you know, the general run of person was, you know, the newspaper writing was so much more articulate and rich than the current. I mean, beyond belief. You know, and just wonderful runs of rhetoric and you know, beautiful stuff. And I love that. And that's, you know, one of the things that I've been trying to do is kind of create these portraits of Montana that are somewhat imaginary, but also play with the kind of richness of the culture at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit from a long, about 40-page prose poem. This is just the opening to it, called The Suburb of Long-Suffering, which is about a community kind of like Helena. And I love Helena. I've lived here ever since '77, and you know, it's just so rich in history, and you know, kind of the juxtaposition of immense wealth from gold and silver mines and ranching, etc., with you know, just a rugged cowboys and miners and the Chinese workers who came here. And one of the things that I've discovered in my current research for another project I'm doing about Helena, called the Helena Notebooks, is, you know, many, if not a high percentage of the people came from overseas, of course, just like everywhere in America. And, you know, so just imagining all the accents that you would hear on the streets or in shops is fascinating to me. Yeah. And so I can maybe talk a little bit more about that later. But so this is the opening to The Suburb of Long-Suffering. Yeah. The spring evening is quiet, even tranquil. A gentle wind ruffles the leaves of the cottonwoods by the river, the thick growth of red willow and wild rose. In the gathering darkness, we tend our gardens, watering the shoots by hand, searching out and destroying every weed, every last strand of alien grass. We are content, and a collective sigh redolent of pleasure rises over the roofs of our houses, over our roofs of cedar and tile and black stinking tar. To paraphrase the Russian master, spacious world, quiet houses. Our beloved little suburb built of brick and wood and stone welcomes you, nestled here at the base of this earthquake-shattered mountain, far from the great cities of this world. It strives to be charming, handsome, even cosmopolitan, an oasis in the great American desert, and we, its residents, find it so. Beware, I am not always conscious of my true feelings. Beware, love inevitably fades. Welcome. In my journal bound in red Italian leather, between boards covered in hand-marbled papers, on off-white, lightly textured pages, I have written for your elucidation a series of reports of varying lengths, loosely joined by interlocking themes, images, voices, about a great emperor who rose from his monstrous tomb and wandered the earth, unchained by his fierce desires and an inexplicable change of heart, about a man and a woman, lovers, and how their love faded and their mouths filled with bitter phlegm, about a town quiet, tranquil even, and how it slowly came to reveal its hidden, violent depths, its sensual nature, its underbelly of suffering and despair. I am your guide. Welcome. Let us praise the perfect text, that text which contains the world whole, seamless, without blemish or disjunction. These are fragments. These days are fragmentary, broken into shards. They may shine in the noonday sun, but that is their only brilliance. Let us praise the perfect text. Let us call it elusive. Beware, our weather of late has been bone dry, and even tonight's breeze, scarcely a whisper, raises a dust fine as flour. When you drive slowly through our dusty streets, do not expect to be greeted with open arms. The grand, much touted hospitality of Western towns has never existed. It was a pretty myth created to comfort those who dared enter the great American desert, that vast, fearsome emptiness at the heart of 19th century maps. Do not be alarmed or insulted if we turn our backs on you and flee from your approach. Bear with us. Because of our extreme isolation, we sometimes find the faces of outsiders strangely comic, absurdly coarse-featured like those of apes or the maimed. We try to keep our emotions in check. Like you, we detest unrestrained outbursts, hysterical laughter. But on occasion, despite our best efforts, anguish is evident, even when it is concealed.
Oh, that's great, man. And that's just the beginning of and you say it's a 40-page sort of poem in that voice. I love that bit on hospitality, Western hospitality there where we were at. That was just wonderful. Where not to take too much of a detour, but where did you grow up?
Okay, so I was born in Kalispell, Montana, and then at age 2, I moved to Helena, and then in the 5th grade, I moved to Billings, and so I graduated from high school in Billings, and then I went to the University of Montana. So I'm pretty much totally a Montana boy.
Yeah, you've been around the state.
Yeah,
totally. But and so I mean it's and that's I haven't really been around the state that much, but I've been in like 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of 4 or 5 different locations for a while, long enough to get to know those little places. And 3 of them were little dinky towns, and that that whole hospitality thing there rings totally true about moving to a small town in Montana.
It can be, it depends, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. No, I loved living in all the small towns I lived in, but it's just the reality of it. And perhaps, as you say in the poem, it has to do with isolation. I don't know what the reasoning is for any of that, but it is a very, it's an insightful thing about life out here in this place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
So, thank you, Mark. So I'd like to, I know you've done a lot of this too, but I've written a number of elegies for folks who have passed, friends and family.
Right.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to read an elegy I wrote for my father, Fletcher Newby. He passed in 2002. Way too young at 76. And Fletch was by profession, he was a wildlife biologist, a zoologist, and his specialties in his research were pine martens and wolverines. And so that's something that's referred to here. But in his last days, my two siblings and I split the day into 8-hour shifts, and we sat vigil with him in St. Pat's in Missoula.
Right.
And so this is called Night Vigil. Night Vigil. See, I got a little turned around here page-wise. Find that page. Sorry about this.
No problem. We got all the time in the world.
Okay.
Our time.
Okay, where did that damn page go? Okay, well, I'll just grab the book. That's easiest.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Night Vigil. I find something soothing. Dry crackle of leaves in wind, darkened house, cold moonlight on crusted snow, dog and cat in luxuriant sleep. After the darkness, void. After the silence, vacuum. Dust spirals soundless among chill stars. He had us laughing, a tale of moose turds and savage appetites, tracks of an otter, scent of wild onion, a companionable walk, father with son, along the wild still water in deepest autumn. His totems, fur-bearing mammals, pine marten, fisher, fierce wolverine. An enormous man reduced to ashes and paltry gravel, relegated to a stout wooden box he will rupture at the seams. This is, he murmured, a very impermanent life. Mighty legs splayed, forlorn in the tiny bed. I see him, a swaggering bull elk with fine, intelligent eyes stained the blue of river ice. In the half-light at bedside, I matched the pulse of his breathing, even as it slowed, even as his intervals stretched, breathless and peaceful, into distances. My beloved son, and he took my astonished hand, held it to the grizzled cheek, head tilted back, mouth ajar, rasp and rumble of the dying man. He rumbled unshaven in parting. I hope you found me brave and swift and seedy as ever. In last days we shaved him. He sat trusting and still. eyes shuddered against the light, razor scraping his slender cheeks, the broad chin, that tender bloody lip. He startled awake to the snap and pop of a bending knee, invented a sudden world of flame and double-hulled boats, of men with guns and ravening dogs. Is it flame-proof, this world, he wondered. He was grateful to have known love, to have felt love, to have loved. Nothing more precious than that last glance of recognition.
Beautiful. Lovely portrait, man. I love the images. It captures, it captures so much about anybody that's ever had the opportunity to be in that situation, end of life experience, particularly with a parent,
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
Nothing like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, except I suppose with a spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the opposite would probably, I've tried not to imagine the possibility of having that situation with a child. I can't imagine those people that have gone through that situation, but
oh God, yes.
But it's because it's the rite of passage. It's the natural way of things. There's almost an honoring in their departure. These people that have given you everything, and you did him great honor with that poem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, he's a great man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what else you got in your bag of tricks?
Okay, let's see what we got going here. So, one of the things that I've been doing, and this is just for my own, just to reconnect with my earlier self. I had written a lot of poems before that first collection, and they didn't make it into that book. And as I've been working on assembling my selected poems in the last couple of years, I came upon a bunch of those earlier poems, some of which I quite like. So I've decided to possibly include a little group of early and uncollected poems in that book, maybe as a kind of an appendix or something. But so this poem is called Bass Creek, and it's set in Bass Creek up in the Bitterroot. And I had some friends who lived up there, and in a commune, as it happens, in the early 70s. And so this is Bass Creek. In this hut, dogs sound the sun like whales singing birth. In another, the lantern flares. I dance through dust, through dead leaves, to break ice and bring the water. The blur of sun on glass spins my hair, my beard, and I turn to catch the dark eyes of deer who lure me to them. I walk slow, bent spoon outstretched, offering warm mush, this mush the deer tongue. Late afternoon, I pull off my boots and burn the slow undersides of boards. Out a window, young corn wavers 2 feet up, and I wash the earth of our garden from my hands, our garden of the green shoots, of the mud that slides, of water and no water, only memory of a full sluice. I light the lantern, and we gather around this table, the dogs, a stray child, women and men. Late sun draws us, caught by marigolds, lodged sharp-edged in honey. And in that last light, we ride across canyons on the backs of wild deer.
Yeah, sweet. What else is poetry besides observation and chronicling, right? In this,
that's right.
And so that's you've been a poet for a long time.
Yeah, isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, pretty goddamn good thing. I think anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to turn 70 in March, and
Yeah.
One of the things I did want to say was that I'm not a prolific poet, so it often is 10 or even more years between books. And
Right.
I guess for me, the only way I can work on these projects is as if I had all the time in the world.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel, and then that helps free me. I don't feel as much pressure, and because I worked in publishing all my life, there's a tremendous amount of pressure in all kinds of other publishing. So
Yeah.
this is for me a wonderful refuge from that kind of pressure. I love that other too, but poetry has a special place in that regard.
Well, and we go back to this conversation. At least it happens almost invariably with everybody. But I mean, a part of it too, I think, is the fact that it doesn't have a huge monetary value attached to it.
Yeah, and there, again, that's a huge freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it'd be nice, but
Exactly. Yeah.
it just doesn't. So one is comfortable with that, and it's utterly useless in that sense. But we, of course, think it has great utility.
And it has very important personal value to you, but at the same time, there's a method to that madness of expressing your own take, because you hope that someone else is going to like your take or take your take and make their own wonderful world of experience of life, right? I mean, it's that's the whole thing. So there really has, the monetary value is unimportant in the world of poetry. You understand why it's not there, it's just
right.
It's not important.
And fortunately, we have a few readers out there. So, that's always lovely when you find a reader who responds powerfully to your work. I mean, it's rare, but it happens, and that's lovely.
Yeah. And sometimes it only takes one.
Absolutely. I'd like to read something that's in process from my selected poems, from the new poems in my selected poems. Here it is. So this is, my wife and I have enjoyed a cabin property out by Clancy in the Elkhorn Mountains for the last 30 years. And it actually has been in her family until recently. We actually ended up selling it, but until recently it was 100 years in her family. So it's kind of a profound place for us in many ways. And in Old Friends, I believe it's in Old Friends Walking in the Mountains, I published a series of cabin poems, which are about that place. But this is a sequence that I'm working on called Rattlesnake Creek Ranch. It's on Rattlesnake Creek, and it's a lovely place full of big ponderosas and grasses and endless fields of lupin. So,
all right.
Rattlesnake Creek Ranch. The great snag hosts cavity dwellers. The creek chatters and scolds. Letting the peace of the place enter one, the hank, hank, hank of the nuthatches, scream of the red-tailed hawk high above the canyon. You must clear your mind. There are no rattlesnakes. Your grandmother killed every one. Carrying a sharpened shovel, we step gingerly through the tall grasses. The wind sleeps with the slow cattle. Elk wend their way to the ridgetop. Far below, insignificant humans pull weeds in the hot summer sun. We sleep restless on our cots under the stars, a cough from high on the ridge. A mountain lion, we think, and hightail it for the cabin. No, says the zoologist, simply a white-tailed deer alarmed by the improbable. We are not country people. Our neighbors shake their heads and snort. From the low-hanging power line, the lazuli bunting sings its bright song, jets to the highest reaches of the tallest ponderosa, and then quiet drifts down. Moth flight, they call it, this tumbling descent. Wing beats slow and deep, deep and slow. A gentle form of aggression, these wing quivers. They tell us, this is not your territory. Back off, find another place to settle.
All right.
Well, Mark, how are we doing for time?
Well, you know, I'm really not sure about that. I'm not a great timekeeper. I think we've got some time, probably another good 10 minutes or so, I would guess.
Okay. Well, I'd like to read another elegy, if you don't mind. This is an elegy for the painter and sculptor Bill Stockton, who is from Grass Range, Montana, and is a fascinating guy who, during World War II, was stationed ended up in France, and then after the war, he studied painting in France, in Paris, and actually married Elvia, his French wife, and brought her back to Grass Range, which had to be a bit of a culture shock. But Bill was really one of the central early modernist painters in Montana, and he was a crusty fellow, and sometimes difficult, but he was a magnificent artist. And I got to know him a bit, and it was really a pleasure to just be able to hang out with him. And so when he passed, I wrote this elegy for him. And just a couple of things to know about the poem. Every once in a while, there's something that may seem a little odd. And if you look at the poem, you'll see that in small caps, there are these phrases, and each of those phrases is a title of one of his paintings. So, you know, and it's pretty, anyway, just a great artist and a great man. By the way, he wrote a wonderful book called "Today I Baled Some Hay to Feed the Sheep the Coyotes Eat," which is all about his ranching life, and it's quite wonderful. Kind of a classic, Montana, Montana ranching life. And he was, by the way, of course, he was an active rancher throughout, in addition to doing his art. So,
landscape painter.
Well, sort of. He was most, in his early work after the war, he actually was a pure abstractionist, more in the abstract expressionist mode. And in fact, an artist who has close ties to Bozeman, but was in New York, told me that he thought that Bill's work was stronger than some of the contemporaneous work of Willem de Kooning. So anyway, he was a very strong painter. Yeah. And his work later on became more representational, but still very loose, and just wonderful work. So this is it. It's called Untitled, after and in memory of Bill Stockton. We drive the road through sere grasslands and into watered canyons, seeking the new branch of the Picasso tree. We pass through this dusty town, divorced from modernity. We hope for a bracing vision. Across the tumble-down bridge, dust swirling behind, we encounter the spavined gate, still upright but weary, and there they are, flowers and distant hollyhocks, strident beyond the sagebrush, in this landscape in ochre. Once some poppies splashed the slope above the tangled garden and slouching barns. Today, magpies crack their jokes from bare branches of the dream tree. Even at the end, his hand faltering, he painted his homely favorites, Chinese mountain in orange, two women knitting, weeds along the road. Even at the end, his line unfailing, he painted without stinting, and we are pierced by tenderness, by a quiet intensity of yearning we can scarcely countenance. How came this bull pine in black to speak of a man alone who was never alone, accompanied as always by his Elvia, her beautiful face? When we are young, we all are beautiful. Grave, radiant, her limbs lovely as that fig tree in Toulouse, where first she led him to taste undreamed of pleasures. Under that blue tree, green tree, they danced at the center of a world unfolding in delicious Paris nights. He dreamt of home, the box elders at night, winter brush, and a skiff of snow glowing under moonlight. In dream, he mourned on hands and knees before the tomb of the lost, the lamblot tree, while coyotes wailed and waltzed to their own music. From nearby hillsides to distant coulees, the coyotes mourn his passing. 6 birds in a tree chant condolence. The sheep in their pasture are bereaved beyond comforting. Even the back of a chair, those straggling brush branches, those 2 potted plants, and that brick wall, unattended, yearn for his vigilant, irascible, tender, imponderable, loving gaze.
Nice, yeah. You know, and that I noticed that when I read the poem, and I noticed and then you made a note at the end of it that these titles, these block letters that were in the body of the poem were the names of particular paintings that he had made. And you know, those, in a way, it's an honoring of the artist to choose the titles of their works to include within the body of a poem you write. But it's also even more than that, because those titles are so odd in a way, odd, ODD, to the regular sort of telling of a eulogy, that it forces you, the poet, to go in different ways with this language. And then it creates this, like a painting, it creates almost an abstraction, but it stays focused on this feeling of a eulogy. So it creates a wonderful poem, and it's a gift to be able to take those things and then make something like that up. Don't you?
Yeah. I think so, and yeah, there's a certain quality of including those, as you say, that it's a restraint and or a constraint that oddly frees you to go in directions that you wouldn't normally go, and so it enriches the poem in a way that might not happen otherwise. And
right, like those exercises that we got from writing teachers that would give you a handful of words and say, you have to use these words in a poem, write it, and then you would come up with something, and you're walking down your own slant, but then these things would come in, and it would definitely alter your voice or your typical patterns of thinking and operating and word choice. Yeah, that's nice. I'm sure Bill would be proud.
I hope so.
Let me ask you this real quick. I know you're going to share something more, and I don't care about time anyway. So, grass range and Stockton, am I thinking right? Is it grass range and Stockton in the center of the state that are little dinky spots together?
Yeah, I think Stockton is nearby. Don't hold me to that, but yes, it's not that far. It's not that far from Lewistown. Exactly. It's kind of between Lewistown and Roundup. It's
because I lived in Augusta and of course taught school there, and of course if you were a teacher in a small town school system like Augusta Public Schools, you wound up with a coaching job. And we used to go to Centerville, which was the high school between Stockton and Grass Range. And,
oh, wow.
And do the football games and stuff there. And it was years later, I remember hearing from Kim Zupan that he'd grown up in Stockton.
Right.
Which is close to Grass Range, yeah.
Yeah. And wasn't it a coal mining town?
So there was there was a mine. I guess it was coal. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Montana's full of great stories.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, I guess, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit from this new text that I'm working on called the, the Helena Notebooks. And again, I wouldn't really call this prose poetry, but if you're willing to allow poets in Montana something that's more narrative, I'll read it. Okay.
Oh, totally.
And maybe we can finish. This is brand new, and it's I'm very uncertain about where this is going. I'm working hard on it, and I've been doing research for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years on it, and it focuses on it's kind of half prose poem and half family chronicle, and it's about a family. The narrator is a Scot, and he, like my grandfather, came down out of Ontario. Was born in Ontario, but his family were all Scots, and both of his parents were Scots. This actually is my great grandfather, sorry, and he was born in Paisley, outside of Glasgow. So get that straight. Anyway, so it's based on that family, who are very upright Scots, as you can imagine, highly religious, although my great grandfather actually was kind of a rascal. And then it's also based on my wife's family, a part of my wife's family, and they came from both Bohemia, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, and from Germany, and they were Jewish, and they came and started very early in 1865 or so. Came to Helena right at the start of the gold rush, and they became merchants, but they also became cattle raisers and cattlemen, and big cattlemen. One of them is a guy named Louis Kaufman. And Louis Kaufman is the rancher to whom Charlie Russell sent the painting, The Last of the 5,000, or Waiting for a Chinook, about his cattle during that horrible winter of 1889. So, but anyway, so this portion, and I've renamed Louis Kaufman Louis Kirshner, just so I can be a little more free with him. Okay. Every story is a story about loss. I would never call Louis Kirchner a naive man. If you saw him at his leisure at the club, playing German solo with his cronies, all of whom called him K, you would never see anything that suggested a romantic, a soft-headed sentimentalist, easily manipulated and scorned. Rather, you saw an admirable man of middle years, measured in his movements, clear-eyed but never cynical, suit jacket taut across powerful shoulders, hands coarsened by work, his thick German accent the only clue that he was no native-born American. But of course, most of us came from far places. Like so many Scots, my family had come to Montana via Canada, Ontario to be precise. My birthplace, Paisley, on the outskirts of Glasgow. And Kay's partner, Joseph Starker, called Jay by all, hailed from the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, part of the newly unified Germany. And of course, if you ventured, as I did too often, into the smoky environs of Mabel's house and saw Louis laughing with little Betty Lesueur or dandling buxom Genevieve Levy on his knee, you saw at a glance that he was a man of the world, untroubled by moral qualms, so unlike myself. Generous, expansive, a true man's man. He never drank to the point of inebriation, whereas I always drank far beyond, only to wake shattered in some strange bed. That Louis would come to suffer so grave a heartbreak seemed nearly unthinkable. I suffer heartbreaks every fortnight, but mine are never grave. My heartbreaks are so chaotic and unreasoning that rarely is any true feeling involved, only a desperate infatuation and a dreadful lust. I could never imagine Louis losing his head over some young girl, no matter how comely or crafty she might prove to be. Louis is, after all, an earthly philosopher who believes in the slow, sure unfolding of a life, the building of wealth and love and a solid new culture where progress is ever the byword and all citizens work for a common good. I am too skeptical by half. In my sober and my drunken moments, I challenge his calm assurance and make him laugh. But I know that part of him shares my conviction that all humans are not reasonable and that the histories of our two peoples, Scot and Hebrew, are proof positive, or more rightly negative, of the ongoing existence of unreason, the unleashing of dark energies and unbearable oppressions.
Well, that seems to be a particularly timely piece.
Yeah, that's in part why I'm doing it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. It's the same old story over and over again from the time that we began to put things down on paper, right? I mean, we continue to think that that what we put down on paper will help others, and we will continue to move forward and be positive and learn how to live together and love one another, and then we get the other side of the coin always shows up, and
absolutely
this dark energy comes back. You can't, it's like you can't have too much love or something, before
that's right.
Fan again,
Yeah.
Crazy.
So just an anecdote, and I'm not sure how I'm going to work with this, but just that stunned me. I came upon a mention of something called the election riot of 1867 in Helena, Montana. And what happened was, in 1867, shortly after the war, the Republican administration was encouraging local communities that had Republican administrations to allow their Black citizens to vote. And so that was the case in Helena. Well, firstly, as soon as this was known, according to this one, I think, newspaper account, gangs of Democratic toughs went around the community and threatened every black person and told them they better not vote. So the morning of the vote, right downtown on the Gulch, this big white fellow came up to this black gentleman and said, "Are you going to vote today?" And the guy just kind of hemmed and hawed, and the white guy pulled out a pistol and shot him dead. "I'll make sure you don't." And so that's the kind of story we don't necessarily remember about our lovely town. Apparently the guy was arrested, of course, but the riot happened because there were kind of equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats quickly gathered, and it took them like 2.5 hours to go a block and a half to get him to the jail because there was such turmoil.
Yeah,
probably fighting. Yeah. And I still haven't found a direct account of what happened in that 2.5 hours, but I'm assuming that there was a lot of fighting.
Oh yeah. It's phenomenal that at this time we could still be basically in a similar sort of state, or at least.
Yeah, I mean, not very far at all from that.
No, it's still very, very, it's too close, that's for sure, and too close for comfort. I mean, it's hard to believe that. Well, you know, I have this conversation all the time, but I don't think that it's one that we can, just because we have it all the time doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to be having it. I think it's very important to be having it over and over again, that the reality of the situation, it dictates that those of us that still believe in the truth and the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States shouldn't stand up for it and say, as the dude said, "No, man, this aggression will not stand." Eat on the
exactly.
Rug, man. No, it's just.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that poetry can somehow help with that.
Me too. And I think you're on the right track. I wish you luck on this project. I look forward to it. It's typically listening to prose out loud, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily feel like poetry. Some feels exactly like poetry. It's easy to listen to, but I had no problem listening to that. I'd love to listen to more. So we'll look for Helena letters in the near future, hopefully.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been great. I really appreciate the opportunity, and you're doing everybody a great service with this series of this archive of Montana poets. So thank you.
It's my honor, man, to be able to, if you're given the chance to do something like this, seems like a good idea, and so good to listen to you again, man, and good to see you. I hope we cross paths again soon. We'll get over there to the capital city one of these days. And
likewise. Okay. You take care.
Thank you. Rick Newby. Join us again next week. Poets in Montana.
Got a lifetime filled